Hi guys, Andrew here with headphones.com. Welcome to the Headphone Show, and today we're going to take a look at the DUNU SA6. This is a multi-balanced armature IEM that comes in right at around $550. Let's take a look. So to begin with, let's get the disclaimer out of the way. This unit was sent to me by DUNU for evaluation, but they have not paid me to say anything in particular about it. And of course, all opinions and thoughts are my own on this, but a big thanks to DUNU for sending this along for evaluation. Now, this is an IEM that I think should be getting more hype than it is, and in this video I will explain why. But if you guys are just interested in the measurements, I will have posted those on the Headphone Community Forum, and I'll leave a link to that below in the description. In any case, let's begin by talking about the build quality, design, and comfort, and accessories, and the cable, and all the rest of that stuff. Now, when it comes to the landscape for high-end IEMs, DUNU has been at the very top when it comes to comfort, and you see this in many of their designs, including, their flagship, the DUNU Luna, which is a dynamic driver IEM, all the way down through the rest of their line, like the DK series, the DK 3001 Pro. Comfort and form factor seems to be a priority, and the same is true for the DUNU SA6. This is an extremely comfortable IEM. Now, it's definitely larger than the DK series, and it does use the typical acrylic style shell, but this is notably smaller than what's going on with the Audio Monarch and Clairvoyance. Now, curiously, the nozzle on the SA6 isn't really that much smaller in terms of diameter when compared to the Blessing 2 and Blessing 2 Dusk, but it doesn't really stick out as far. And so I think, for folks who have trouble with the Blessing 2's fit due to the nozzle size, this will be a little bit better, but just keep that in mind that this does still have a fairly thick nozzle to it. Now, if anybody knows my preferences for build when it comes to IEMs, I love this acrylic style shell. It doesn't feel like it's going to chip away anything or be damaged when you just sort of set it down or throw it into a backpack. But thankfully, they also do give you a nice case for this, and they do give you a number of accessories along with a whole host of different tips that you can use. And for the cable, they do give you a modular system here with different tips that you can use. And it's actually a little bit nicer than what's going on with the audio modular system, because with this one you don't have the ridiculously long end piece that just sort of fits on. So those are more just like adapters, whereas this is actually the cable ends themselves. So that's a really cool innovation that they've got going for them. Additionally, the cable here is class leading. This is what all cables should be like. It's absolutely fantastic. Not only does it look cool with this sort of like two-tone shade with white and gray, it's also really easy to use. It doesn't really tangle, and it doesn't get caught on anything, and it's also not microphonic. So this is, in my opinion, the gold standard for what cables should be. DUNU did an excellent job with that. As far as the aesthetic for the shells themselves, this one in particular is this sort of orange pattern going on. I kind of like it. It's not the most flashy that I've seen, but this was the one that when I was, walking around, I got the most compliments on. So take that for what you will. Now let's talk about how the DUNU SA6 sounds, and I'm going to switch it up here and talk about the tonal balance and frequency response first. And for anybody who's unsure how to read frequency response, I'll have left a link in the description for how to read this. When it comes to IEMs, the target hasn't really been as well established as it is for over-ear headphones, and in some ways you kind of have to have a little bit more experience with how things should look when it comes to IEMs. So that involves kind of evaluating multiple different IEMs and seeing how various different IEMs kind of compare with one another for the frequency response. I'll be throwing up other graphs as well, and we'll see how this compares to the Monarch and the Clairvoyance and the Blessing 2. And again, this is all done on the Gross RA0402 coupler, and that means there's a bit of damping going on for the resonance at 8K, but it also kind of subdues the treble a little bit. So just keep that in mind. So starting with the bass on the DUNU SA6, this is exactly where I want the bass level to be, and importantly, the way that this transitions into the lower mid-range is absolutely fantastic. One interesting thing to note here for the bass is that on the back of the SA6 you do have a little switch that you can toggle, and this elevates the bass. You can turn it on or turn it off, and when you turn it on, it elevates the bass by about 1 to 2 dB. It's really not that significant, but it is enough to be audible, and I do find I prefer it when the bass toggle is on. So if you want a little bit less bass, you can just switch it off and you'll be fine. But for this evaluation, I'm going to be leaving it on. The overall bass shelf comes down at an appropriate spot, but it's a little bit more gradual than what's going on with the Audio Monarch. and also a little bit more gradual than the Clairvoyance as well. So you get a little bit more of a balance there for the upper bass, but this is tastefully done because the rest of the bass isn't as elevated as what's going on with the Monarch. So effectively this means you get distinct, satisfying sub bass without really losing, the upper bass and the tone, richness of tone for a wide variety of genres. And it's subtle, but I think this really matters because this means that the DUNU SA6 is extremely versatile for a wide range of genres, including genres that don't fully token the sub bass frequencies. It's still going to be satisfying in the bass, and yet at the same time, it's not going to bleed into the mids or obscure anything else in the mix, even though it is a little bit elevated there. So for the overall bass level here and the way that it's handled, it's excellent. And it's actually very similar to what's going on with the Moondrop Blessing to Dusk, which I'll have a review of soon. Now, the more significant differences for this IEM start to show up in the upper mids, where all of those other IEMs, like the Clairvoyance, the Monarch, and the Blessing to Dusk, are a little bit more elevated, somewhere around 2K. The DUNU SA6 is actually a little bit more relaxed. If you compare the frequency response for ear gain with the 64 Audio U12T, the DUNU SA6 is like identical. Like the whole frequency balance is very, very close to the 64 Audio U12T. So it's well balanced here. It has enough presence and energy to sound fun and engaging. It's the right distance between the upper mids and lower mids. Nothing sounds, like it lacks body or anything like that. But at the same time, this isn't going to be fatiguing or shrill or shouty in any way whatsoever. And actually, this is my favorite IEM so far for more intense music with electric guitars like rock and metal and stuff like that. I love this IEM for that. Now, moving up into the treble, there's a bit of a recession there around 6K, and this means that it's not going to be particularly sibilant, but it does also lose a bit of presence there. There's some ways of doing non-fatiguing kind of sound where it just sort of, relaxes the whole ear gain region, and that's not this IEM. That's not what's going on here. It has the presence there that you would want in order for it to be engaging, but at the same time, it's just a little bit relaxed, and then in some places, like at 6K, it pulls it back so you don't get an overemphasis of the sibilant tones. I do think it was a little bit much though on this. Now for the rest of the treble here, you actually get really good mid-treble presence above that, and it's a really good balance there. So, your cymbals crash through with a lot of, presence and authority, and it doesn't sound, out of balance or not. There's no percussion compression going on. In fact, it's basically perfect up until, the upper last octave of the treble, where this does, roll off a little bit. I think it's actually okay though, because where the rest of the treble balance is, it's got enough energy there to still be satisfying, and you don't really notice it on most recordings. It's only if you're really listening for it that you kind of start to miss some of the, very last upper octave stuff, at least comparing this to the The Audio Clairvoyance and the Monarch. I think it has a similar kind of roll off to the Blessing to Dusk. But in general, this is one of my favorite tunings, period. I've said it before that the 64 Audio U12T is my favorite IEM, at least when it comes to the tuning, and in many other ways as well. And the DUNU SA6 is very close to that tuning. I've seen other reviewers say that this is like a baby U12T, and I think that's accurate. That's exactly how I would describe this. And for that reason, I think this deserves quite a bit of hype. For all these other really excellent IEMs, competitive IEMs coming out these days, like the Blessing 2 and the Blessing 2 Dusk and the The Audio, Monarch, and Clairvoyance, this fits right up there with, IEMs that are really performing quite a bit better than their price point would indicate, at least when you look at like the traditional landscape for IEMs. All right, so let's talk now about the technical performance of the DUNU SA6. And it's interesting because this is a strictly multi-balanced armature IEM. Now, I've been of the opinion for a while that hybrid IEMs are just simply superior. Hybrid or tribrid IEMs are superior because I honestly don't really like balanced armatures that much. They typically have that sort of balanced armature timbre, and I've become more sensitive to that over the years. And I also find that for multi-balanced armature configurations, the bass just really isn't that great. You look at the Campfire Andromeda, which, especially the 2020 version, is a fantastic IEM. It always has been a good IEM, and the new one's even better. But the bass really is the thing that's lacking on that, the bass quality. And that is where I am truly surprised at the DUNU SA6. Enough that, when I first listened to this, I thought to myself, wait, this is all multi-balanced armatures going on? There's no dynamic driver in the bass? And really, if you had told me that this was a hybrid configuration or had a dynamic driver in the bass, I would have believed you. Comparing this directly against the Moondrop Blessing to Dusk, the bass quality is very similar. And I know that it's not the best for dynamic drivers in the bass, and dynamic drivers generally still do better, but it's competitive with hybrid configurations, and that really did shock me. And to describe that a little bit better, this has a similar kind of dynamic driver sense of impact to it. Again, not the best, but it is definitely better than what you typically get with multi-balanced armature bass, better than the Campfire Andromeda's bass, for example, and I really love it. It's very satisfying. And once again, if you think about what the 64 Audio U12T does exceptionally well, it's multi-balanced armature bass, better than any other multi-balanced armature configuration that I've heard. The U12T is just the best one at handling bass. And while the SA6 isn't on that level, it reminds me of that. It makes me think there's more life left in multi-balanced armature configurations. And it turns out that it's actually from the I think they're vented Sanyon woofers going on in here. So this is it's using different balanced armatures for those bass frequencies, and I really do think it's effective on this. Now, for the detail retrieval here, this is not on the level of the U12T, of course, but it is competitive within its price range, and I do think it's competitive with other IEMs that are a little more expensive. It's funny because I've been spending a lot of time comparing the The-Audio Monarch and the Clairvoyance, and while the Monarch is, definitely a step up from the SA6 as far as instrument separation and clarity and detail, I really don't think that the Clairvoyance is a significant step up. Now, it is in some ways because it's a tri-braid, but as far as like detail retrieval is concerned, I think this is competitive, or at least fairly close. And the only real advantage there with the Clairvoyance is that it has better treble extension, so it does give you maybe a little bit better sense of it there in the treble. And I think just comparing this with the Blessing 2 Dusk, that's been kind of my primary comparison. I do think this is like the next step up from that as far as detail. It's not a huge step up, but as far as the overall like image clarity and separation and all of those different qualities that lead to a better sense of those finer little nuances and details in the music, this is very, very good. Now, when it comes to soundstage, this isn't the most spacious presentation, but it is a little bit better than average. Importantly, though, it's not really doing any of that sort of soundstage faking trickery kind of stuff with the frequency response. So yeah, you get a slightly better than average soundstage, but nothing that crazy going on. And of course, when it comes to timbre, this is a multi-balanced armature configuration. It's not the worst that I've ever heard for timbre there, but it does have that characteristic to it a little bit. Now, I've been comparing this to a number of different IEMs in this review, like the Blessing 2 Dusk, the The-Audio Monarch, and the The-Audio Clairvoyance. And for my money, it's, those are the IEMs to take seriously and look at within, the price range of, $320 all the way up to, $720. As I've mentioned, as far as technical performance is concerned, I do think that the SA6 is priced appropriately. It fits right in the middle there. So if you can't quite swing the $720 or whatever it is for the Monarch or the Clairvoyance, this is the one to look at. And if you want something to be a little bit more than the Blessing 2 and Blessing 2 Dusk, then I would recommend the SA6. But interestingly, as far as the overall tonal balance is concerned, the comparison would be as follows. If you want a generally neutral tuning with a crazy sub-bass shelf, a very distinct sub-bass shelf, that's going to be the The-Audio Monarch. If you want a slightly more balanced tuning with a lower mid-range emphasis, and a little bit more smooth treble, that's going to be the Clairvoyance. If you want a little bit more upper mid-range presence, maybe around 2K, 3K, you're going to look at the Blessing 2 Dusk. And if you want something a little bit more relaxed there, you're going to look at the DUNU SA6. Now, again, I have to say that out of all of these IEMs, the Monarch, the Clairvoyance, the Blessing 2, and the Blessing 2 Dusk, the SA6 is actually the most versatile for, the widest range of genres. That's been my finding so far. This does extremely well with just about everything. In that sense, this is probably the best all-rounder out of all of them. As much as I think the Monarch and the Clairvoyance are both better IEMs than this, there are times when I listen to the Monarch and go, man, that sub-bass shelf is just too intense. Same thing with the Clairvoyance, where the lower mid-range thickness just kind of tends to be a little bit too much for me. And then with the Blessing 2 and the Dusk, those are my preferences for any, acoustic music or anything that has like acoustic guitars and things like that. But for anything that's maybe a bit too intense there in the upper mids, the SA6 would be my pick. So in conclusion, do I recommend the DUNU SA6? If you are curious about what the 64 Audio U12T sounds like, but you don't want to spend the $2,000 to get it, this is a much more budget-friendly way of getting that kind of sound. Obviously, you don't get the same level of detail and all the rest of it, but You get a very similar tonal balance with the SA6, which means that it is extremely versatile. This is what I would buy if I was looking to spend $550 on an IEM. And for that reason, I do think that the SA6 is the new benchmark there at $550. If this had come out a year earlier, this would be the IEM that everybody's talking about. But because we have so many excellent IEMs now, like the Blessing 2, the Dusk, the Monarch, and the Clairvoyance, the DUNU SA6 is yet another IEM that fits in that excellent value, excellent price to performance group that's come out this year. So yeah, I absolutely do recommend it. Anyways, thanks for taking the time to watch this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.